from the John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge.
Good evening, everybody. Looks like we have 20 plus friends, future friends of John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge. So go ahead and throw on into the chat if you've been to the refuge before. I always love to see who's been around or heard of it or wants to come down here. Well, I'm going to throw a few questions out as we're going through this so about some engagement. That way it's not just, I'm sitting here eating dinner and seeing what's going on. But thank you, Tony, for that introduction. I will say that I have just moved into my new apartment, and so I haven't quite figured out the background and everything for our webinars. I am going to cut my camera off here, but so throw any questions you have in the chat along the way, and I'll pull it up at the end so we can ask it. I'll leave some time at the end for questions. So let me turn off my video, and we'll go ahead and dive on into this. I wanted to, so this is our presentation. We'll be talking about the biology program and what we do here at the refuge for restoring the habitat to benefit birds and everything else that kind of interacts and comes to the refuge. Let's see, there we go. So this talk, we're going to talk about who John Heinz is, where we are, and some of those management challenges. And then talk about how we deal with some of those challenges in 3 main restoration projects. We'll talk a little bit about the impoundment management, this 150-acre impoundment we have here at the refuge and what that means to birds all throughout the year. And then also talk about the importance to the community and how John Heinz interacts with the community of Southwest Philadelphia. And lastly, we'll talk about if any of y'all are in the Philadelphia area and are interested in volunteering, I'll be happy to go into the depth of what our different volunteer programs are so that we can get you involved and help you come out to hopefully benefit the wildlife and the birds that come use this refuge. And of course, like I mentioned, time at the end for questions. So as Tony said, I'll breeze through this slide. So my name is Garrett White. I've been here at John Heinz for about 3 years. And graduated with a degree in environmental studies and biology from a small school outside of Richmond, Virginia, called Randolph-Macon College. Please put in the chat if you've ever heard of it, because not a lot of people have, and I always love to see if there's any other Randolph-Macon grads out there. This came up in another presentation a few weeks back, and I was like, wait a second, there's another alumni? So it's a really small world when we find each other. So let me know if you've been there or heard of it. And as Tony said, my job description is about the habitat management and planning, but also connecting people to nature, that getting people to care about it just a little bit more is a little bit different way than other biologists have done things. A lot of other biologists are, they study, they do research, and they send out their papers, and that's great. But my personal philosophy and at the refuge is that if folks don't know why they should care and they don't care about it, then all those research, all the projects, all those studies are for naught. So I really want to make sure that at the end of this, you just care about those wild places that we love so much and care about just a tiny bit more. Although I have a feeling with this crowd, this is a pretty environmental friendly crowd so far. So if you are outside of Philadelphia or unfamiliar, or even within Philadelphia and unfamiliar with where the refuge is, we are right here in Southwest Philly, right by the airport. There's the airport down there. Hopefully you can see my cursor. And Philly right here in Southeast Pennsylvania. And this land is within Lenape-Hoking, which we now call Philadelphia. This entire area was the original homeland of the Lenape. And it sits, it was the Unami-speaking Turtle Clan of the Lenape, which this area specifically for the refuge is in Southwest Philly. A little bit of refuge history. We were established in 1972, exactly 50 years ago. We celebrated our 50th this year in June and had a really large celebration. We had estimates of 800 plus people over the course of the day. It was a huge event. But this refuge was established primarily by the community. It protects the largest remaining freshwater tidal marsh in Pennsylvania called Tinicum Marsh. And in the 1960s, when the federal government was looking at building I-95, it was going to cut right across this marsh here. And the community said, no, this is a wild space. This is a beautiful protected space, and we want to keep it that way. So don't put your airport or your interstate right through here. I-95 is right there. It literally goes right up against the border of the refuge. And so they wanted to protect that. Also within our founding legislation is for environmental education, to be that first urban refuge so that folks can see what is the Fish and Wildlife Service about and how can we interact with it. In renamed, we were originally called Tinicum National Wildlife Refuge, and we were renamed for the late Senator John Heinz in 1991 after his death from a mid-air plane collision, actually. We are also part of the Urban Wildlife Conservation Program, where we practice the standards of excellence. These standards of excellence are these 8 pillars that we work to focus on when we're doing our work, particularly these top 2 up here: knowing and relating to the community and being a community asset. This is a pretty big part of our work to make sure that we are providing that equitable access and modeling sustainability, and figuring out how we can be helpful for the community around us. And I want to point out this aerial image here, that we are this little oasis, this little green oasis here in Southeast Pennsylvania. You've got airport right here, and you've got I-95 cutting through, and all of this impervious surfaces. And there's about 350 acres or so of tidal marsh out here. But this whole area, from the mouth of the Schuylkill River, all of the airport, Tinicum Township, a little bit over here, this 6,000 acres used to be marsh. And so this used to be what would filter Delaware and would the Delaware River. And this is where water would end up. And so when you take 6,000 acres of marsh and reduce it to 350 acres, when you have large storms like Isaias 2 years ago, this is what happens. You have drastic flooding that not only damages the refuge, but also the community around the refuge. Dozens of homes in Eastwick that are still recovering 2 years later from this kind of flooding. It really brings us a lot of management challenges. There's a lot of trash, invasive species, this flooding that I mentioned, of course, sea level rise and climate change. These are all things that we focus on. These are things that I'm sure you've heard about and are concerned about. And so this is what we look at, is what can we do about it? And so what we do is we set these habitat management goals so that our habitat is more resilient for wildlife and for the people that use this refuge. We got, of course, our great egrets in the middle there, but we had that wild rice that came back, and our some more volunteers and maintenance staff here at the refuge that really work hard to help us with these goals. And we focus on a ton of different species. We really look at the biodiversity of the entire area. How can we improve this space for wildlife and people? Some of the wildlife we look at are some mussel species there, but also the frogs and the turtles, and of course, the 300 plus bird species that come through this refuge. I mean, I would love it if you would put in the chat your favorite species, if you have been to the refuge, that you have seen either here at the refuge or in Southeast Pennsylvania. I'm sure some of you have some great stories. So go ahead and throw a couple of them in the chat, and I can read them at the end of this presentation. But one of the things that we can do is also improve our ability to hand manage all of that floodwater, so that it's more helpful for those species and for the community. So I'm going to highlight a few of these projects here, and we'll start at the bottom with what we call our turkey foot restoration. If you've been to the refuge in the last 2 months or so, there was a small portion that was closed off. It's called Turkey Foot because there's 3 trails that kind of fork at one spot. But we are converting these tidal ponds, these tidal ponds here and here into tidal wetlands. The whole area is about 10 acres, and though most of the work has been completed so far, we'll finish our planting come this spring, and we'll keep monitoring it through 2024 through 2025. One of our goals for this spot, because of the topography and the plants that we're putting in there, we're actually hoping to ideally attract black rail. I know it's a bit of a pipe dream because there's only 300 or so plus pairs out in the wild, but the hope is that we can at least build that habitat if not for black rails, then of course the other rails and secretive marsh birds that do love these marshes. So the way that this project works is that we had this area where there was trees and invasive species, but we then scraped off kind of the top area here, and we filled those little wetlands to raise the bottom of those ponds and lower the rest of the area. And this is kind of what it ends up looking like. This was our westernmost pond over here, that this was really high over here. And so we filled this in to make this a more adaptable, more manageable system. What you'll notice is that in this area, while it might seem like a great spot, outside of it, it was dominated by invasive species that aren't helping our birds and not really helping our wildlife. And a lot of it was because we had these steep banks like this. There was zero intertidal space for those species. All of our wading birds, our migratory shorebirds, none of them had an opportunity to live and migrate through and really help with this area. And so what we did is we had these steep banks, and then basically we made them nice and shallow. And so this is what it ends up being. What is this? 6 weeks later, so end of August to early to mid October down here. And now it's nice and smooth and flat. And so we'll planted a number of shrubs, native shrubs that will help not just the pollinators, but also those birds and provide that dense grass habitat. And so come back in the next couple of years and you'll really see this area blossom, literally, no pun intended, blossom with new plants and new restoration. So this is one that we just finished up or / will be finishing up this spring with the final planting. Another one of our large restoration projects that we're hoping to start next year, but it might, just because of permitting and funding, might start in 2024. Is what we're calling the Darby Creek Trail Marsh Restoration. This is kind of in the middle of the refuge, and this is about 150 acres of our 350 acres of marsh that we really want to restore this for all of our well, many reasons. But this is Darby Creek Trail, and there's currently a bridge here and a bridge over here, and there's some water passage, but this whole area was a previous dredge disposal site. And within this area, there was about 2 to 4 feet of historic fill. And within this area, it was really minimally connected to the tidal hydrology, or the way the water moved through this area. It really wasn't efficient and effective, and it wasn't helping reduce the flooding in the community. Marshes act as sponges and really soak up a lot of water during storms. And so when they're not functioning properly, that's not helpful with the little bit that we have left. And lastly, it was really dominated by invasive species. Phragmites, we've got surveys that we're covering 60, 70, 80% of this area, depending on the year. And so we really wanted to knock it back. And so we've really worked with aerial spraying to get rid of that Phragmites. And now when you come to the refuge, there are, dozens of acres of wild rice and spatterdock and all these awesome plants that are helping all of our migratory bird species. But the next phase of this project, after we got rid of the invasives mostly under control, is to basically dredge some of this area and create those new channels that'll be really helpful with that hydrology. So on the left here, you've got our current low tide and high tide and our desired conditions on the right. Had some modeling finished, and the plan is to dredge about 13,000 linear feet of tidal channels in this tidally restricted wetland. It ends up being about 7 acres of channels and pools overall, but that would really help restore the tidal flow and allow the wild rice seed and other native plants to be transported into the wetland interior with the tide. Really help with all of those plants taking root and providing that beneficial habitat for all these species. Keep thinking about that oasis that we are along the flyway and in Philadelphia. So it would also help establish some of those intertidal mudflats and those deeper water channel habitat. So we had this modeling completed, and the main thing I want to point out is that we're adding another bridge up over here and a new channel cutting across this. That would really help increase the amount of, or decrease the amount of time it takes for the marsh to fill up with water and to release water. So you get much more of that flushing impact. That's really helpful for these marshes. Our anticipated improvements for all of this, I know it's for visitors, it'll be a bit of a disruption because we'll have to close down large sections of the trail for who knows how long. But that additional breach will really give us enhanced marsh function. It lets them do what it's supposed to do and filter and provide that food source and provide that flooding benefit to the community. More habitat for the fish nurseries and the fish passage, improved water quality as the marsh can filter water and all the particulates out of it. And one thing that I'll point out too, that'll be really beneficial is that all of that dredge material is going to end up in this kind of triangle down here in the bottom right of your screen. There's about 16 acres there that right now is all Phragmites and Japanese hops, 2 invasive species that outside of cover don't really provide much benefit for a wide range of birds. And so we're going to replant that with all that dredge material. We'll add what we need to do to make it great soil and then restore it to likely a shrub or scrub habitat. We don't see a lot of shrub habitat in the region, and so being able to add that back should benefit some of those other species. I mean, you can start listing species in the chat if you want, and I'll add them to the presentation in the future. But the rest of the marsh work will really help those secretive marsh birds as well. Outside of the wildlife impacts, there's also the visitor impacts as well. We're going to, our plan is to add another kayak launch to that area, as well as an observation tower, which will really increase the wildlife dependent recreation, as well as there's more opportunities for fishing and of course, bird watching. As I mentioned, all that new habitat and restored habitat should see a nice burst in bird populations that hopefully all of y'all out there doing eBird will help document. That's one of my goals too, is to get a little bit more eBird access out there. Another project that our long-term goal is our impoundment restoration. So we have this 150 acre, 145 acre impoundment that ideally we would turn half of this into back to tidal marsh and let nature do what nature does best in an area like this. And what this would do is increase the flood resiliency of this area. If a marsh can function like a marsh and act as that sponge, that's going to do a lot more than us raising and lowering these water levels. It would also help restore the natural hydrology, which, as I mentioned, really helps with that flood capacity part of things. The next steps for this project really are about the modeling and seeing out what is the best way to go about this. So we sketched this out with this yellow on the map here, but this might not be how it ends up looking in a decade. We'll see. But this is one of the goals, is to restore things back to let nature do what it can do. But in the meantime, we have this impoundment water level. So we have this impoundment where we raise and lower this water level throughout the year. I'm about to go on why, but for right now, we have this pump project with Ducks Unlimited, where you come to the refuge today, tomorrow, next week, for the next couple months. The part of the refuge, this part in red at the top of your screen, is closed off. And the reason is that is we've got heavy equipment and we're installing these river screen pumps, which allow us to more efficiently and effectively lower the water level and pump water out of the impoundment. What this does is it gives us greater control, because right now we just have basically a 4-foot wide pipe that we can kind of sort of over the course of a couple of weeks lower and raise the water level, but it's not super effective. And it doesn't really allow us to be adaptable to the different wild weather scenarios that come out. You know, if we get a lot of rain, we can't pump it out fast enough, or maybe we're not getting enough, so it's dropping too low. And so that's probably giving us issues. So every year kind of presents different challenges. And so we're adding these pumps to help us with that. So impoundment management, if you're unfamiliar with it, I'll kind of give you the full range of what are the, how can this go forward? How do we move forward? So right now in wintertime, if you came to the refuge, under normal circumstances, in November about right now, we would be at what we call full pull, where the water level is about as high as we would want it. And what this does is it gives that refuge for all the waterfowl and geese and some wading birds and some of those water birds out there, to give them space to forage and overwinter until they want to go back up north for breeding. Starting in the spring, we would begin that drawdown where we slowly start to take water out of the impoundment and lower it down. What this does is it exposes all those mud flats, and you get all these awesome shorebirds that are migrating through as they're working their way up north. In an ideal scenario, under the best case, we have timed it so that we have maximum mud flats during peak shorebird migration in April and May, and all of a sudden you come out there and you've never seen so many killdeer and spotted sandpipers in your life, and that's the goal. And so sometimes we nail it, sometimes we don't, but with those pumps, we should hopefully be able to nail it more often than not. So it exposes all those mud flats for those migratory shorebirds. What that also does is it stimulates the growth. Buried in all those mud flats are a lot of seeds for grasses and forbs and things like that. And so by exposing them, you get that sun on those plants or on those seeds, and they start to germinate and grow. And then in the summertime, we keep that water low so that it keeps growing. So all those plants keep growing and providing that nesting habitat, and the flowers can grow and provide pollinator habitat, so that all of our secretive marsh birds and anything else can use that area as they normally would as for nesting. Come the fall, we start to fill it back up. And again, it provides that food source, some of those seeds, some of that habitat for those birds heading right back south. And that's really important to provide that habitat for those stopover birds. And then lastly, we're back in winter, where again, we're at full pool, and all of those grasses, all of those forbs that started growing are now flooded with 1 foot to 2 feet to 3 feet of water. And so all of those dabbling and diving ducks are going down and tugging at the roots and getting at the microinvertebrates that are living in there, trying to get all of the nutrients that they need to survive the winter. And again, to fatten up and hopefully go breed again. That's their goal, right? So this is a really awesome time, wintertime, to see, sometimes thousands of waterfowl. I would love in the chat if you would kind of throw out some of the things that you've seen, or the most number of birds you've seen at the refuge, or even just anywhere in Pennsylvania. I'm curious to see where I should go as well. So go ahead and throw that in the chat so I can know what's happening out there. And so we know all of this is important and helpful, because we do surveys, and years ago, other scientists all throughout the other fish and wildlife biologists throughout the region studied this. And so we continue to monitor our populations here, not just our bird populations and how the water level affects them, but also all of these other surveys that you see here in your upper right. So we, in this biology program, we conduct research on our deer population, on anurine calls, which is our frogs. We look at our vernal pools, how are they reproducing? Are they growing or shrinking? We have awesome volunteers who help out with our acoustic bat monitoring. Our bat surveys, we set out all throughout the year, or all throughout the spring, summer, and fall to see what bats are coming through the refuge and staying here. And so we've got 5 bat species that we've definitely confirmed, and there might be more, but we're keeping an eye on all of them. I've also worked with professors at Drexel University and a number of other local universities on a bee inventory, specifically Drexel for the bee inventory, but a number of other projects. So it's really try to get as much research done as possible with professors and students so that they can also learn and use this place, not just me. I'm not an expert on everything, that is for sure. And so the more that I can lean on the professors to help them in their research, the better. This past summer, we also had an invasives inventory and management survey completed, started. I had 2 awesome Drexel co-op students, if you're familiar with the Drexel co-op program. These 2 students mapped all of the invasives and what percentage they were for about 55–60% of the refuge. And I've got 2 more students coming back this summer to complete that inventory. This allows us to set those management goals so we can figure out, all right, where can we spend our time managing some invasive species, and what needs to wait till later? Where's the worst spots and the best spots? How can we manage this? The last survey I really want to, a research project I want to highlight is our turtle nest project with St. Joseph's University. If you walked through the refuge and you saw those little cages that said research project, don't touch, those were covering turtle nests. And so we actually have a student researcher looking at the invasive red-eared slider versus the red-bellied turtle and our eastern painted turtle to see how they compete for resources for each other. And so looking at their growth rate. So they're literally in a lab right now, growing, swimming around and getting measured. And then we will re-release the native turtles back come May. So that's another fun project that we work on here throughout the summer. I mentioned as far as the management side of things, instead of stepping away from the science, I mentioned the impoundment water level, so going up and down with that. But we also have our pollinator garden. So how can we create the best habitat possible for our little pollinators? They are so important to the ecosystem, and they can be ecosystem drivers. And so we want to know, how can we increase our pollinators both on the refuge and outside in the community, creating pollinator gardens in vacant lots and at community gardens all throughout Southwest Philadelphia. Another project that you may have seen if you're out in the refuge is our snakehead removal. Northern snakehead are a invasive fish in the refuge, and they are as well as common carp. And so what we did is we removed a lot of those invasive species so that our native species can grow and have sustainable populations, particularly removing carp. This summer, we removed over 1,200 common carp in the refuge. And while that might seem like a bad thing, that really helps those waterfowl throughout the winter, because there's more habitat for them there's more submerged aquatic vegetation for those macroinvertebrates to grow, you can get some of those ecosystem disruptors out of the way. One of the last projects I want to highlight is our Japanese knotweed removal in one area of the refuge. This was about an acre of Japanese knotweed, kind of in the southeast corner of the refuge. And I want to focus on, you're looking at the cursor here. So you've got this tree right here, and you've got this tree in the background, as well as two power lines and power line poles back there. And then, so this was a before we started work, and this is about 3 days later when we cleared all of that Japanese knotweed. And so what this does is, I mean, the Japanese knotweed is gonna grow about 10 feet tall, basically. But then it regrew to about 3 feet, and then we were able to spray it with invasive, with the herbicide, Roundup is what we used. And then it will regrow. Some of it will resprout, some of it won't come this spring, but we'll mow it down again and do one more of the herbicide spray on it. And then ideally, research has shown that that ends up getting you about 95% removal of Japanese knotweed. It's a really tough plant that unfortunately it takes literally a couple years of pretty intensive management to get it out. And unfortunately, we have to use chemicals on this. There's really, outside of mowing it for like a decade, you really can't exhaust those root reserves. And that's just not feasible with our staff and everything. So it makes it a lot easier to do it in 2 years, the way we've done it for this area. But the exciting part is that after next summer, once we do that second round, we're anticipating planting this with about 400 plus shrubs and trees to benefit and restore this area to more of a native natural habitat. And so we're definitely going to need some volunteers to help with that. So if you're interested in coming out next, probably October or November, depending on how the spray goes in August, we will definitely use you 1 year from now. Which brings me to the volunteering at the refuge. There are a number of ways to get involved. We have the easiest way is our stewardship Saturdays. They are the second Saturday of every month, generally from 9 to noon, and they really are just a group of folks who assist in a large project. For instance, every spring we will take elderberry and dogwood and cut live stakes from them and plant them in some pots and then water them all throughout the summer. And then in the fall, October, November, we'll replant them out in the refuge to really help increase the native plants that are growing out there. So that's one of the kind of large project, but otherwise it's just a really great way to get involved in the community and be a part of these folks who really just want to help improve the refuge as much as possible. So really low lift, just hop on, send me an email, and I'll be happy to connect you with our volunteer coordinator to kind of get you on our listserv and get us moving forward for some future projects. So that's our stewardship Saturdays, but then we also have our Weed Warrior program, which is much more focused on like identifying those invasive species and then tackling them. A lot of times it's on your own time, and it fits your own schedules. We'll have folks who they come in every Tuesday from 8 to 10, and that's what they want to do. And other folks, an hour here, 2 hours there, 8 hours there, and it works for how they want to help. And so we teach you each of the invasive species along the way to grow your knowledge and help you become a better naturalist and a better weed warrior. The last kind of program with our volunteers is our Adopt a Plot program, where literally I designate an area and I say from this tree to that creek to this area to this landmark is your area. And you, now that you've learned a bunch of invasive species, you go tackle it. So a lot of times it's you pull it when you want, but it's your area to improve. If you need help, some of those stewardship Saturdays can go help you with your plot, or depending on how people show up. But to get to that point, we'll say it does, you're not going to jump in just a couple of weeks of volunteering at the refuge. but we'll happy to point you on that path so that you can help improve one area of the refuge and really come back year after year and see that you've made a difference in one small part. Because I definitely believe that if each of us do that one small part, then all of a sudden the world has changed. So that's the heart of that goal. If none of that interests you, there are other opportunities at the refuge that are sometimes biology related, but there are volunteer coordinator, Erica, she does a fabulous job of working with you to figure out where you would like to fit in, whether that's helping with our archery programs, whether that's volunteering at our front desk in mornings or afternoons to answer phone calls and help visitors as they come in. But there's also leading bird walks and other talks along the way. So plenty of ways for you to get involved if you're interested in coming out to the refuge. And one thing to really kind of tie this back is John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge really operates as a place for community members, particularly those from Southwest Philadelphia, to rest and recharge. It's really important for those folks in Eastwick. Eastwick is a environmental injustice community, which are those. It's a phrase that comes from community members, and it's really important for their mental and emotional health. This area has seen lots of promises, lots of broken promises from city, state, federal, whomever. And so one of our goals is to work to reduce those impacts as much as possible, and to help this community, to be that community asset that I mentioned earlier. So it's listening to them and saying, how can we help you, instead of here's how we want to help you. So all of these projects that I mentioned, this is something that comes from those conversations where these community members say flooding is a huge deal. Safe spaces and pollinator work is a big deal for us. And having spaces to go and bird watch and get out and see these things, that's a big deal for us. And we really want you to help make it better. So that's what we're trying to do with all of these restoration projects, with all of this work going forward, is to respond to their concerns and also to help deepen their connection to nature. One thing that I like to try to do as well is to change any of those negative perceptions of marshes. 50 years, 60, 70, 100 years ago, marshes were dirty, disgusting places that we can just dump all of our stuff and forget about. They really weren't that important. But they are, right? Like these are the places where you go out and kayak with your family and your friends, and you see when that Sora and when that Virginia rail pops out and you go, oh my gosh, did I just see that? And yes, that happened to me once and I was awestruck. It was really cool to kind of watch those things happen. But you can't have that without those kinds of marshes. So by knowing and relating to the community and being a community asset, we can be beneficial and helpful for the community and for the environment. Hopefully make this a more resilient habitat through these projects and through knowing this community. And with that, I will turn it over to questions. See, there's at least one in the Q&A and 12 chats that I got to throw up. So let me pull up this chat and see what we got. Marsh wrens, Tony says, definitely lots of marsh wrens out there. Some of my favorites to see out there. I'm always like, listen to that raspy warble, they're out there. And then every now and then a kid will be like, there it is, I hear it. But yes, add your birding stories. What else am I missing? And hingas. Curious. That was before my time there. We do get a lot of cormorants here at the refuge. I'd be curious to see if it was confirmed in Hinga versus a cormorant, but I believe you, Mike. I bet it was. How much of the impoundment level is controlled by you guys and how much by natural rain? That's a really good question, and it's kind of hard to to put into numbers. A lot of it is Lamar Gore and I, the refuge manager, and Mariana Bergerson, the deputy refuge manager. We'll look at the weather every now and then, as depending on where we are in the year, and we'll say, oh wow, this looks like a really big storm. We should open this up and preemptively lower some of them, lower the water, and sometimes we will. We don't necessarily hold back any water to anything like that. It's just more about lowering it in case we get a lot of rainwater. But we try our best to manage it as best as we can in terms of keeping it to our target numbers throughout the year. We keep an eye on the weather. What is a snakehead? And Mike said invasive predatory fish. That's correct. So did James. It does attack everything. I think it's documented. Oh, is it like 70 plus different species? I'm definitely lowballing that one because I also have another number in my head. But it attacks a lot of species that have been discovered in its stomach, including frogs and turtles. There have been a number of those discovered as well. And the invasive fish. Ooh. Yes. And we've actually noticed anecdotally, which is why we're doing this frog call survey, there's a neuron call survey, that our frog population within the impoundment seems to be dropping. So we're trying to put some numbers, some hard numbers on it to demonstrate it, but it seems to coincide with the introduction of the northern snakehead. And so we think that's having a pretty outsized impact on our frog population. So trying to get some numbers on it and working with some professors on that. But that is our goal, is to not have a decreasing frog population. The turtles in impoundment, both painted and red-eared, I think, percentage of each or others, do they ever hybridize? So the painted turtles and the red-eared sliders do not hybridize. But we have had a couple of yellow-bellied sliders, which are cousins to the painted or to the red-eareds. That they will hybridize, but we haven't seen it. We have not seen it at the refuge, though it is possible. A lot of these red-eared sliders and yellow-bellied, if not all of them, are released pets. And so I definitely have to say that if you are a pet owner of any of these or any pets in general, please do not release them at a refuge or any wild space. The majority of the time, the animals do not survive. I know you think that it's being helpful and humane, but in reality, they've been fed by people their entire lives or most of their lives, and so they don't know how to fend for themselves. And so the majority of the time, they do not survive. But in the off chance that they do, they can create these populations which will disrupt the balance of our relatively delicate system. And so you have these species that are competing with each other. But the painteds and the red-eareds do not hybridize. Percentage of each or others. We do have a large number of painted and red-eared sliders and quite a few red-bellied turtles. And one of the reasons that we have this research project is that we're noticing that we have plenty of red-eared sliders and painted turtles, various ages all throughout. So you got the young ones and the right kind of population dynamics. But for our adult red-bellieds, or for our red-bellieds, we see a lot of adults, but we don't see as many say teenagers and juveniles as we should. So something's going on there. And so we're asking all the different kinds of questions to figure out what's impacting those populations. Because while those turtles can live 40, 50, 60, 70 years, we don't want to wait that long and then all of a sudden don't have a red-bellied population. So we're staying on top of it now while we can to make sure that that population stays healthy and stays here. I remember hearing about an oil spill years ago. I guess that got resolved. Yes, so there's 2 oil spills that you could be mentioning. One of which, not hilariously enough, but one of which was on our, there's actually a pipeline that cuts through the refuge. Let's see if I can pull up that picture. I'll go all the way back. I don't want to make y'all dizzy, but almost there. There is a pipeline that cuts through the refuge that in 2000 is this pipeline. Well, that's not the best picture. 2 more, almost there. There it is. Well, that was not a good photo. We'll go back to this other one instead. But there's a pipeline that cuts to the refuge that the oil company noticed that there was a oil leak. And the person who actually discovered it was actually cross-country skiing. So you can really see how things have changed in 20 years that they could cross-country ski at the refuge in 1999, 2000 or so. And now we're lucky to get any snow in December. But the other oil spill that you might be thinking of is the Athos, which ran aground on actually a buried anchor in the Delaware River and dumped a number of gallons of oil into the Delaware River. And actually what is funding the restoration project, that's actually partially funding some of this restoration project, is leftover money from that oil spill. So yes, it got resolved. There's no active oil leaks on the refuge, knock on wood. Hopefully it stays that way. Hoping that access for mobility impaired visitors is kept in mind as these projects continue. I love the areas I can access. Yes, absolutely. And so currently it is wheelchair accessible up through, if you're seeing the upper right-hand corner of your screen here. It's wheelchair accessible across the impoundment and all the way around to about right here where the end of this ramp is. You have a certain kind of wheelchair you can make it across this gravel. It's not the best with your kind of quote unquote normal wheelchairs, but the goal is to, once this pump project is finished and once we repair this dike from the storm damage 2 years ago, we do intend to pave this. I don't have a timeline. I wish I did. But we do want to make this ADA accessible as much as possible so that folks can at least enjoy this, at least this part of the refuge, and see so many of those beautiful birds that come through and hang out. Any tiger salamanders at the refuge vernal pools? No. There are 0 salamanders at the refuge. We have our frogs, but that's pretty much it. There really aren't any salamanders here. And a lot of that comes from just the history of the area being a pretty impaired system. And that because of oil spills and because this large red area here on your screen is a EPA Superfund site. Not exactly the fun and Superfund, but it is an old landfill that still leaches some chemicals into the groundwater. And so the EPA is cleaning this up and working with the community to clean this up as best the federal government can. Let's do what we can. Oh, cool! The checklist for the anhinga. Going back to the salamanders, I would love to see salamanders at the refuge. They can be indicator species that the soil is better and that they can survive. But until I kind of know that, I'm also not just going to actively reintroduce them as much as I would want to, and as much as they are a part of the natural ecosystem here. Let's see, Chris, monitor marsh birds, specifically focusing on least bitterns for Erie Bird Observatory in Presque Isle State Park. Opposite corner of the state. Yes, go check out Erie National Wildlife Refuge. I've never been to Heinz. Is there a healthy population of least bitterns there? Yes. Actually, folks who came to the refuge 2 months ago or so were treated to some juvenile least bitterns hanging out at the end of this boardwalk right over here. So they were actually pretty close to people, and they're such secretive little birds, and that they'll nest all up along this impoundment. And yeah, I will say the birders definitely find them whenever they can. They're just like, oh, there it is. And then we try to keep people away from them as best we can. And for the The rest of this March, I'm actually in talks with a couple of students from UPenn's environmental studies program, their master's program, to do some acoustic monitoring of secretive marsh birds all throughout the marsh, particularly in this Darby Creek Trail area, and as well as some portions up here and the northern part of the impoundment. And our goal is to get that baseline data of, all right, what was it like before? And then hopefully do this whole project again, this listening project again in a few years once this project is done and kind of restored. So that ideally we have this really awesome before and after data to say, this is what it was before, and we did definitely make it better for secretive marsh birds after. That's the goal. We'll see how that works out. That's everything in the chat. I think there's still 2 questions in the Q&A. Given the proximity to heavily developed areas, airport, neighborhoods, highways, what are some of the adverse impact on the refuge and some of the mitigations that are needed to improve this refuge? So it's a little hard to judge that, because while we do have a very healthy relationship with the airport, I don't necessarily work with them on any of those kinds of research projects, or collisions, or anything like that. But I mean, Philly is a major airport and there are airplanes taking off all the time, and the birds really don't seem to be impacted by the planes and 747s taking off. So they seem to steer clear of that area, but I don't have any hard data to back me up on that. But we don't seem to run into any issues with those kinds of with that close proximity. Bigger issues end up actually being more like deer on I-95 and in the community surrounding the area, more than any sort of birds or anything like that. Any lessons learned from other urban wildlife areas, such as Brooklyn Bridge Park, Harrisburg's Benjamin? I don't know that one. I'll have to look at the Harrisburg Nature Center. Other lessons learned. I think the largest takeaway that I have is if you build it, they will come to overuse that line, right? From that quote from them. Then creating this habitat. For instance, we took about 17,000 square feet of pollinator habitat, created it in our parking lot. Up here in the upper right, and now we have, dozens of bee species, some of which have been documented on the refuge in the past, and some of them haven't. So Dr. Gelhaus from Drexel University he and a co-op student this past summer were collecting them and documenting them, and so I'm really excited to see what kind of came out of that. So what are some new species? What came from it? But by building it and restoring it, you get these bird species. I noticed that when we raise and lower the water level management, that, in the summer, in the winter time, even if we raise it just a couple of inches, all of a sudden we get more diving ducks in certain portions of the impoundment because there's more habitat available to them. Even throughout the day, we see that as the tides change, that you'll start seeing things, these birds move around to keep going after and feeding. So it's really kind of cool to watch the habitat change throughout the day and throughout the year. Any bird banding as part of surveys? No, it would be a lot of fun. I would thoroughly enjoy it. But between the training and the time intensity aspect of it, there's just too many other things for me to focus on. But there are a lot of other fantastic researchers and professors in the area who do focus on that and focus on all of the bird banding. So I leave it up to them. If they ever need any help, they're more than welcome to send me an email. Who doesn't want to hold some birds? I've done it a bunch in the past, but just not here at the refuge as much as I would like to. Any other questions? I don't see anything else in the Q&A and nothing else in the chat. This refuge, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And with that, I don't have anything else. But do other folks have any other final questions? I'm happy to answer anything that pops into your brain, whether it's biology related, bird related. I'm here.
Garrett, I had a question.
Mhm.
I was just wondering, I'm always interested in kind of the soundscape of wherever I'm birding. What's the sound like from you're so close to that highway? Is it noticeable? Is it distracting?
It depends. For some folks, it can be distracting, but in conversations with community members, a lot of folks are just like, wow, how is this so quiet? Because like compared to downtown Philadelphia, it's like being in a soundproof room, it seems like, outside of course, the normal sounds of nature. When you get
Yeah.
away from all those people sounds, it's people love it. I mean, and then that's kind of the fun part. Um, Different parts of the refuge also have different soundscapes as well. So you'll be right by the highway, and of course you hear the highway air brakes and all that kind of stuff. And then other times you're walking down Hall Road and you hear that one chirp, and you're just like, "Oh, the flycatcher! No way! Like, where is that?" Everyone's just like, "I knew it! There it is!" And I can't tell you the number of times that I'll be off to go do something, and then there's just like 2, 12, 20 people looking up, all doing this thing. And I'm just like, all right, well, something's here. There's 20 of y'all here. What do we got? And then I get out and we chat, and that's the fun part. That is so much fun to have those interactions with folks and say. And I always learn things along the way because I'll say a beginner birder in terms of picking things up and identify them, and not necessarily by noise. And so, nor by sound, I should say. And so when folks are like, "Oh, you hear that? You do this," and that's the best part. One of the best parts about the birding community, right, is learning from them and teaching each other.
Very much so. Thank you.
Yeah. I keep it out of this chat down here.
That's fantastic, Garrett. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Absolutely. Happy to, hopefully you were able to take away some of this. One of the things too is that I knew going into this, like, I'm not a bird expert. I'm not necessarily going to teach some of the folks watching new things about birds. But the message that I wanted that folks to take home is that we're still trying to help them. We still want to make this better and more resilient, both for the birds, but also for other wildlife and also the people that use it, to really increase that community and that connection to nature.
That's great. Thank you.
Good.
Keep burning about your tips from Tony. I've also heard that which I've heard Tony a bunch of times, and then also George Armistead is apparently fantastic, one of the best in the area. So if anybody knows George, so there's plenty of fantastic folks to learn from. No shortage of experts.
Very good. And one thing I'll mention too, Garrett, is I had the pleasure of meeting, you mentioned earlier about your environmental education program, and the aspect of it in the refuge. And I had the pleasure of meeting some of them back in September, where my workplace went down there for a meeting, and we teamed up with them or got to shadow them, I should say. And they're doing a wonderful job in the community down there. And, the kids that they're teaching, hopefully 1, 2, maybe a few of them will become future, biologists or birders, or at least members of communities that have at least an appreciation for the outdoors, whether it's the John Heinz Refuge or wherever they end up, living and going to. So you're all doing a really good job at that refuge.
Thank you. The program that Tony's talking about is our Philly Nature Kids, where our environmental education staff work with all of the 4th grade students from 2 schools really close by to the refuge. I think it ends up being 4 or 5 teachers, 4 or 5 classes. And so they the students interact with our staff every 2 weeks. whether we go to the classrooms or the classrooms come to us. And they all throughout the school year, they work on identifying a problem, coming up with solutions, and then implementing that solution. And so this is really a way for kids to spend, I mean, I think we interact with them, I think 18 times throughout the school year. So way more than just those one-off school trips that happen and can be beneficial, but this is what we find is a very impactful program that has been going on for about 8 years now. And we're starting to see those students from those first classes apply for our summer positions and our college positions. So we're really starting to see some of those fruits of those labor as kids take that interest in environmental careers and just being outdoors and just having that, breaking down that barrier that nature is that park down the way, that nature is just John Heinz and not their backyard. So that's one of those things we really want folks to take home, that students can take home, is nature's not super scary. You can be cautious around it, but it's not scary. Just go have fun and explore it.
Awesome. Well, good job again with all you're doing down there.
Thank you. I don't do a lot of that with that program. I do lots of props to Bree.
In a park setting, it's always teamwork, right? You have multiple facets of a common goal, hopefully.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Any more questions for Garrett? Well, I think if anyone thinks of a question later on, I'm sure they could email the Refuge and maybe get more information. Of course, they have a website online too, which I don't have ready. But there you go. Garrett said.
I was like, I should have put that on the slide. My bad, y'all.
Not a problem.
But there it is. And yes, please, I'll ramble a little bit more so that folks have time to copy and paste it or scribble it down before we end this. But and feel free to share that email address. It's my work email, and happy to answer any questions that pop into your brain at any time. This is one of my favorite things to do with my job, is interacting and having those conversations. So please let me know when you're on the Refuge, and teach me something too about birds.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Garrett, and thank you all for joining us this evening. And hopefully you'll all, if you haven't had a chance yet, get down to John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge. So thank you all.